Diversity and inclusion. So is this sort of a left-leaning, progressive, politically correct thing going on? And what about all those small cities and villages in Wisconsin where, let's be honest, they're not very diverse and they never will be? We're going to talk about it today. Welcome to The Local Perspective. I'm Jerry Deshane, the Executive Director of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. My guest today is one of Wisconsin's leaders in what I would call I don't even know that I could call it a movement. Eric Giordano is the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service. Did I get that right?
You got it.
Thank you for being here, Eric. Among other things, this year WIPS hosted a conference called Toward One Wisconsin, and it was a huge success. We talked about diversity, we talked about inclusion, and you're going to do it again next year. So, first of all, welcome to The Local Perspective. And before we dive into this question, and it's a great question, tell me about WIPS. Where'd you come from, and where are you, and what are you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity, Jerry. It's great to be here. WIPS is going into our 12th year of existence. We started out as a unit of the University of Wisconsin College System and Extension. With the recalibration of all of that and the UW, we are now a unit of the University of Wisconsin System. So I report currently to President Ray Cross, who recently announced his retirement. And so we've just been there for our first year, and it's really exciting to kind of be connected with the entire system.
Your home base is in Wausau, but you're a part of the entire university
That's
system.
correct. I guess you could say we're one of the few entities that is outside of Madison that's part of the University of Wisconsin System Administration, and that's because we started in Wausau, and so we just kind of kept our headquarters there. And quite frankly, I really like being, kind of outside of Madison. Not that I don't like Madison, love Madison, but sometimes people make assumptions about, what you bring to the table based on where you're from. And so having that kind of a more local or outstate approach sometimes is advantageous for us when we work with communities around the state.
So let me see, your Institute for Public Policy and Service. What do you cover? What do you do?
Right. That's a great question. I don't even know why we're named that, but the reality is that we try to bring the resources of the university to address community needs. And most important, we try to address and help and work with communities to address the needs that they identify. And so, we bring the resources of faculty, of students, of, frankly, experts from all sorts of diverse fields around the state, whether it's business or health or, any area. And we try to create collaborative teams to solve problems.
Okay. Well, and diversity and inclusion is a big one on that. You had the Toward One Wisconsin conference, the first annual, this spring. Why that topic? Why'd you go there?
Yeah, two reasons. We were facing an issue up in Wausau where our community was having some struggles around issues of diversity. And it really started with a teen-on-teen violence that centered on a social media incident. It was a Hmong teen and a mixed-race teen. It led to a death. And it really kind of got people upset in the community of all different types. Mm-hmm. And there were some protests, and there were people who were commenting against the protests. And ultimately, it seemed like we were kind of going down a path of action and reaction. And so what we did is we instituted a year-long process that involved a lot of listening, a lot of dialogue, a lot of bringing people to the table, and really trying to come up with our shared values and then ultimately turn those into action plans. So partly as a result of that experience, the CEO of a company not too far from our hometown in Merrill, Wisconsin, the company's named Church Mutual, said, Eric, I'd really like you guys to help produce a conference on this issue, a statewide conference. And so we took on that challenge and brought on a lot of different sponsors and held our first conference in Milwaukee. And quite frankly, it grew a lot bigger and a lot more important than we initially imagined, and so much so that the demand is there to continue to do this conference.
And coming from Wausau, so many people would look at this topic and they'd sort of dismiss it. That's a Madison thing. That's a Milwaukee thing. That's a politically correct thing for the big cities. But you're from Wausau, and it's not, right?
Right. Well, I mean, there's diversity everywhere. And I think intuitively we all know that, right? It isn't just one type of diversity. It isn't just about your skin color. It isn't just about your immigrant status. It isn't just about, I mean, it's everything from your education level to your job, your profession. So there's many different types of diversity. And I think the other thing that really has happened to Wisconsin is we know that we're facing a major brain drain and we're facing a workforce shortage. And I think the combination of those things means that we are trying to figure out, how do we keep people in our communities? How do we attract people to our communities? How do we make sure that the people we're educating here don't go somewhere else, but stay here to work because we know we have jobs? So I think there's some pragmatic reasons why this topic is so critical beyond just the social justice implications that we often talk about.
Well, and you got that. It was a business that came to you and said, hey, let's look at this. And I know in traveling around the state, I hear this a lot, that it's not just a Milwaukee thing. It's a Westby, Wisconsin thing. It's a Darlington thing, because people expect this nowadays, don't they? It's, well, I just want to live around, people that I know, people that are like me. We don't think that way quite so much, or at least the world is changing, is it not?
Sure. I mean, I think by force, right? I mean, whether we want to live with people who look and act just like us or not.
Heaven forbid, by the way. Just saying.
We are faced with diversity every day all around us, and it's only increasing. And so I think there's definitely more attention that's been paid to it. I think we're all a little more sensitive to different issues, whether it's gender equality or differences that are going on because of conflicts around race and other issues. I was talking with the CEO the other day from a Wausau-based corporation called Greenheck Fan. I was talking with their HR director. Anyway, it's a worldwide company, and they said something very interesting to me. They said, it's not just about us and the business taking on an approach that's bringing more diversity and more diverse talent to our business, which is helpful, they said, but the community has to be ready for that as well. So as a business, we can't just do this alone. We have to, have a community and be part of a community that's welcoming to diverse workers and diverse points of view.
Okay. Now, were you surprised at how big the first conference went over? I mean, there were 400, 500. I mean, it was a sellout crowd there, wasn't it?
I think the surprise wasn't so much in the ultimate numbers at the conference. I think by the time April had rolled around, we were sort of expecting that. But it was in the lead up, it was in the planning for the conference. We really didn't know that this was going to be that big when we started out. But as we started moving, I guess you could say, in outward sort of circles of talking to more and more people, it just became clear that there was a great demand for this topic. And I think one of the things that the conference did, which was a little different maybe from other conferences, because by the way, there are some wonderful events out there centered on issues of diversity and inclusion being done in all parts of the state. But one of the big differences is that we invited a large swath of cross sectors into the conference. So for example, we had a track on healthcare, we had a track on workforce, we had a track on communities, we had a track on education. And I think people who came had the chance for the first time to really cut across geographies, cut across sectors, cut across jobs and positions. And that was a very healthy conversation. So I think it's that conversation that started even way before the conference took place that led, I think, to a larger event.
We're going to talk, my guest is Eric Giordano. He's the executive director of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service. We're talking about diversity and inclusion. WIPS was the sponsor, the host of a big conference this spring called Toward One Wisconsin, and that'll be repeated next year. I want to take a little bit of a breath here. First of all, I want to thank the community media stations that help us get this program to you. They do it for us every month. Today we happen to be hosted by the folks at Fact TV. I want to give a particular shout out to Scott, the guy behind the camera today, for setting us up on, frankly, very short notice. But the next question for Eric is, how do we do that? What's the process of having a diversity and an inclusion conversation in your community, You know, is it a knockdown, drag out kind of thing or what? But let's kind of take a little breath here and then come back and jump into that question, if you don't mind. So, Eric, how do you do this? Is it just a vote of the city council and bam, we've got it? You know, there's an edict there. Is there a process that's involved in this? What happens?
Right. Well, first, I don't want to claim to have all the answers to this. I think the answers are in all of us in this state. Second, I think we all know intuitively that just paying lip service to anything really isn't going to change anything. And I've seen examples where, you know, cities and communities have, you know, done exactly what you kind of said. Let's create an edict, or even let's create a diversity commission. But even that, as you might think, that could be very substantial if you don't put the attention to it, if you aren't intentional about what that group is doing, it can actually kind of languish and frankly maybe even have the opposite effect that you intend. So yeah, I think in your question was implicit part of the answer, and I really appreciated the question because you said something about, you know, how do we have a conversation? And I think that's actually where you start. You start with conversations, and I think that that's where I would recommend that cities, counties, governments, and citizens, that's where they start. They start with conversations. And the conversation shouldn't have necessarily a preset conclusion, because every community is different. Every community's version of diversity is extremely different. So what does the conversation look like in our community? There isn't a right necessarily way to go about it other than to make sure you have it. And then together, you know, come to some shared and common ground around what we want to do next.
Because, and this goes back to earlier in our conversation, diversity and inclusion, while every community has some sort of diversity to it, it's also very different in every community. Westby, Stockholm, everywhere, Wisconsin, very different than Green Bay. And what it means in Green Bay is going to be different than what it means in Stockholm. But if I'm the village president in Stockholm, help. Where do I start? You know, do I just sit down and have a cup of coffee with people that I think I ought to have a cup of coffee with? Is there any kind of a guidebook, toolkit, map out there, anything?
Sure. I'm glad you asked.
Help!
There actually there are toolkits out there. We know that the ICMA puts out a toolkit. Now, I've looked through that pretty thoroughly, and I just want to state, while it's very helpful, it's a toolkit, meaning it's a combination or a smorgasbord of ideas and opportunities. So you can't just look at it as a cookie cutter process for any community, but what it does have is a set of tools that said, you know, you might want to consider this. You know, you might want to have certain ground rules, for example, when you hold your meetings. And what do those ground rules look like? And how do we make sure those ground rules make sure everyone feels welcome? There's opportunities there to talk about how do you start conversations about this topic, which is what I was saying. And I think even that idea of, you know, a city council person or a mayor, heaven forbid, you know, go out and actually start having conversations with people in their community. That's a great informal way to start. I think there are opportunities through these toolkits to say, how do you sort of put out a statement about the values of the community, or how do we build it into our strategic plan? So all of those things are out there in toolkits and would be a good first start.
Is this something that in your experience you found is easier than people expect, or is it harder than people expect?
Can I say both?
It's my job to ask the tough questions.
Right, that's right. Okay, well, let's start out. It's easy to have the conversation. You and I are having this great conversation, and I think when we have this conversation, it builds trust. It builds on the relationship that we already have. And so it's as easy, literally, as sitting down, as you put it, in a coffee shop and addressing this issue. Like, hey, what do you think about this? Here's what I think. Let's share some ideas. The hard part is when you get to, you know, what do we do about this now? Okay, are there problems? Are there perceived problems that we need to address? That's usually when you're going to have some differences of opinion. Or sometimes, unfortunately, we know that these conversations don't happen unless there is an existing problem. And so now we're actually trying to go back and address something. And that does take a little more intentionality and perhaps a more structured process, you know, to go through.
The National League of Cities has what they call their REAL program. and it stands for race, ethnicity, and something or other, but there's an L in there. But I went to one of their first seminars on it, and one of the things you have to do is acknowledge the feelings and the points of view of someone you may radically disagree with, but you have to at least give that person that space to put it on the table just as you are.
Yeah. I completely appreciate that approach, and quite frankly, I think our country, let alone our communities, needs more of that, don't we? I mean, it seems like we are constantly either at each other's throats, metaphorically, or if we aren't, we're seeing it played out on television and around us, and so we tend to often identify with one camp or the other, and suddenly we start filling in the blanks, right? Well, that person, they kind of lean a little left, or they kind of lean a little right, so they must believe X, Y, Z, and we're not really having the actual conversation with each other. And I think once we start having the conversation, what we realize is the truth of this hyperpolarization that we keep reading about is that it's actually a polarization of the extremes. Most of us are somewhere in that middle. Mm-hmm. And so there is a lot of room here for conversation, but we really have to let us have that conversation, and provide the opportunities to have that conversation.
Well, and the other question that comes to my mind is this a one and done? And I sort of feel like I'm asking an easy question here. The answer is obviously not. But is this something, on the other hand, you got to bang away at every week? Where's the answer to that question? Okay,
if we just look at the history of our country, right? I mean, we know that America as a democracy isn't a finished product, right? And it's an ongoing process. So I would say that's true of anything worthwhile. We have to we have to start the conversation, yes, and then we have to continue it, because unfortunately there are always going to be people out there that unfortunately have hate, have negativity, want to tear other people down. We're never going to eradicate the world of that. So, when it comes out and is up there, then that's when we need to be talking about it and saying, well, how do we feel about it? Well, we don't feel this way about it as a community. So what can we do about it? What can we do to show that we, have a welcoming community, that we're united around principles that we value, that we think are important, and to continue to have those conversations?
Okay. I should point out that our conversation grew out of an excellent article that Eric wrote for us, for the municipality, in the November issue. So you all should have that in your mailboxes. Diversity and Inclusion, Let's Have the Conversation is the name of the article. Eric, I want to talk a little bit about sort of a close-to-home experience that you had. I mean, this is not theoretical. The community that you live in went through this, and in your article, you're very honest, and you suggest that, it wasn't perfect. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Right. Well, in the central Wisconsin area, there was an attempt to pass a resolution around LGBTQ a day, and some people know that there is a day designated for that, and there's Pride Month, right, that's sometimes also put out there. And there were some folks who said, we should pass a resolution. In fact, this kind of came out of a diversity commission and certain members of the county board who were on that commission. And so, there was an attempt to do that, and I think it was an honest attempt to help people to feel included. We definitely have, gay workers in our government, in our businesses, in our community, and unfortunately, it sort of took a political turn, I guess you could say, where some people believed that the only purpose of doing this kind of a resolution was for, to score political points somehow. And then on the other side, the view was, well, they're just going against it because politically, they aren't in favor of it. And it really became kind of a very politicized moment. And I think the hardest part for me, as someone who's trying to bring people together, is that we weren't giving each other the benefit of the doubt, meaning whatever side you were on, it was on both sides. I think they both kind of made assumptions that these must be the motivations of the other side, and they unfortunately backed up into political motivations that they thought were motivating these people to act. And I think if we had taken a little more time to sit down and say, okay, well, let's talk about why are you doing this, even asking the question and having some frank conversations, I think we would have found that there are some definite differences of opinion about this, no question about it, but maybe the motivations aren't as nefarious as we imagined. But until we're willing to sort of have those conversations, A, we don't know what anyone else is thinking, and B, we're never going to really get to that point where we can learn to agree disagreeably. And I think that's part of the thing that bothers me, is that in the end, the resolution did pass, but I think some enemies were made, in doing that. I think some lines were drawn, and the next time some other issue comes up, those lines are still going to be there. How do we break those down? That's really what we're talking about here.
Well, and this might be a difficult spot to put you in, so I apologize up front, but let's kind of diagnose your own situation there. What if we want to revisit this in that community, what would you do this time? How would you, okay, we have the history, we can't deny it, it's not going to go away. What next? How do we turn at least a neutral or a negative, how do we grow into a positive? Because I can't imagine yours is the only community where this has happened.
There are different ways to do it. I mean, for example, if you have a group out there like a WIPS or a group that's, a citizen-based group, for example, anybody can take the initiative. The YWCA. There are multiple groups, are in this space that could sit down and organize some kind of an actual conversation or dialogue process. But not every community has those resources or has intrinsic or leadership that just sort of emerges from the citizenry. So this is where I sort of think good leadership comes in. Whether it's at the city level, the county level, there are opportunities for some of our leaders, even our elected officials, to really be part of the solution to the problem, without necessarily siding with one side or the other. Really, it's about structuring opportunities for people to come together, to sit down, have facilitated conversation without the expectation that we're going to necessarily come to agreement, but so that we can better understand one another. And I think it often starts with leadership, to be quite frank.
Okay. And the motivation, I mean, aside from the sense of it being the right thing to do, wasn't there a Knight Foundation study? You reference it in your article. Well, there may be some economic benefit to this as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there are plenty of studies out there. The Knight Foundation study from a few years back showed that there are definitely some communities out there that are more economically vibrant and sound. And one of the things, that seems to be repeated over and over in these communities is that they are perceived as welcoming communities, welcoming in a general sense, that people feel like they have a place there, that they're connected to their community. So there really is some economic value to people feeling that your community is a welcoming place for everyone, right? And I think, if we're trying to attract, people, to our workforce and to our businesses, we have to be able to provide a place where people feel like they have a home here. Now, that doesn't mean everybody has to go changing everything, right? It doesn't mean that, but it does mean that, we're willing to understand that some people have different ways of looking at things. Some people have different food preferences. Some people get their hair styled differently, and do they?
Like mine?
Some that have hair, right?
Yeah. For those people out there that have hair.
Right, some of us don't have to worry so much about that. We're already welcoming. But anyway, so there are lots of different ways that, we can define that. I mean, and so part of it is having the conversation to figure out what does that mean for us, right? And who are the people that are maybe coming to call us home, and are they feeling welcome in our midst? Well,
and I've got to think that, and I mentioned Westby or Crivets or, you name it, Woosauki, Green Bay, Milwaukee, Racine. Part of what makes us attractive is each one of our communities is unique. And there's a historical heritage there, then there's the mixing in of new people coming to town. You don't want that to be cookie cutter and the same everywhere, do you?
I wouldn't think so.
No, that would be boring.
Yeah, that would be kind of boring. And I think there are ways, I think if people can think through this a little bit and say, there are ways to, I hate to use the word protect, but to value the things that made that community unique at its origins, or even as it changed over time, and still be embracing of things that are new, right? I mean, we can have celebrations that say, we're gonna honor the heritage of the people that first settled here. We're going to honor the heritage of those people who made this an economically viable place. And now we realize in the 21st century that some changes may need to take place. But you know what? We're going to honor those as well and find a place for all of those things to coexist.
My guest is Eric Giordano. He is the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service. And let's spend our last few minutes talking about the upcoming Toward One Wisconsin Conference, the one coming up next, what is that,
April 28 and 29, 2020.
And you'll be in Green Bay?
Correct, in Green Bay.
Registration is up and live yet?
It's up live. You can find it at inclusivity-wi.org or at t1w.org.
Okay, and I'll ask you to repeat that in just a second. If I'm kind of thinking to myself, okay, this is something my hometown, my Stoughton could grow from, what are the takeaways that you're hoping I could get if I attend this?
Right. A couple things. One is we're really focusing the conference on what is innovative, what is happening out there that is replicable elsewhere. So it isn't just about pointing fingers about what's going wrong. It's about what are solutions, and more than that, what are solutions that have promise to be evidence-based, meaning if we could do a few of these over time, we are going to be able to know what works and what doesn't. And this is really across sectors, so it's in terms of business and how businesses are really addressing these issues and attracting workers. It's about communities and making communities more welcome, and so forth. So it really is an opportunity, I think, for any community or community representative to come and say, let's see what's working over there in Green Bay, in Fitchburg, in Wausau, wherever those places are. So we're really trying to emphasize solutions-oriented information.
And 2 days. Who are any keynote speakers whose names I'd recognize, or is that all still in flux?
Sure. No, we have a couple really excellent keynote speakers. One is named Hillary Ware, who is the corporate counsel for Netflix. And she also happens to be an LGBTQ activist, and she's coming to speak, but also coming from a very strong business perspective. Mm-hmm. And then we also have Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's a New York Times Magazine author and the creator of the 1619 Project. I encourage your audience to look that up. It's a really fantastic project. And then on top of that, we've got a CEO roundtable that's happening on day 2, where we're literally bringing in CEOs from Wisconsin-based companies to talk about what they are doing to help in this space, and a variety of, we've got 60 different breakout sessions, so Wow. It really should be exciting.
It'll keep you busy.
Definitely.
If you would, repeat the website so people can go there to check it out.
I think the easiest would be t1w.org.
Very intuitive, t1w.org.
Right.
Eric Giordano, it was a great pleasure to have a conversation with you.
Thanks for having me, Jerry. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And Eric and I have a lot of other subjects. We will be talking again.
We do. Yeah. There's a lot of issues we got to resolve, especially finding a good barber.
What are you talking about? I'm Jerry Deshane. This has been The Local Perspective. My wonderful guest today is Eric Giordano from WIPS. And go to the Toward One Wisconsin conference next spring. Look for it on the website t1w.org. And thank you for taking the time to be with us here on The Local Perspective. I want to give a shout out one more time to the guy behind the camera. Scott, you're doing a great job, as always, covering up my bald spot. I do appreciate that. And I also want to thank Wisconsin Community Media. Have a great day.